You are lying in bed right now, on a spring mattress engineered for precise rebound, your head on an ergonomic pillow, covered by a cotton blanket that weighs almost nothing. The room is cool because the air conditioning was set before you got in. You turned once, adjusted the pillow, and fell asleep without having to think about any of it. None of that existed 200,000 years ago. Not the mattress, not the pillow, not the room, not even the concept of a surface designed for sleeping. And yet every human who lived before any of it was invented still needed exactly what you needed tonight. Real, unbroken sleep. A surface that wouldn't kill them, enough warmth to make it to morning. Our ancestors solved it, every single night, somehow. How did they do it? Most people assume the answer is badly: cold ground, exposed to predators, waking constantly, surviving on exhaustion until the body gave out. The image is always the same: figures curled on bare earth, half conscious, getting just enough rest to function before the next day of survival. Here's the problem: almost none of that turns out to be true. The sleeping surface wasn't bare ground, it was engineered. In 2020, Lynn Wadley at the University of the Witwatersrand excavated sleeping layers at Border Cave in South Africa, dated to 200,000 years ago, and found something no one expected: bedding. 30 centimeters thick, not scattered for warmth, structured. Think about what 30 centimeters actually means. That is roughly the distance from your wrist to your elbow. A layer of compressed grass that deep doesn't feel like lying on grass at all. You already know this feeling, even without thinking about it. Sleep on a hard wood floor for one night, and it's never your back that wakes you up first. It's your hip. Or your shoulder, if you're lying on your side. The two boniest points on your body, pressed straight into a surface that won't give an inch. 30 centimeters of packed grass doesn't do that. Press a hip into it, and the grass right under that one spot sinks in just enough to let the bone settle and spread its weight sideways instead of straight down into a single point. Everywhere else, where there's muscle and fat between bone and ground, the grass barely moves at all. It doesn't need to. The same mechanical principle sitting inside a modern spring mattress. Built from grass. 200,000 years ago. The grass wasn't random either. Broad-bladed grasses were chosen on purpose, the same kind whose natural oils still show up in citronella candles burned to keep mosquitoes off a dinner table today. Same logic, different plant, 200,000 years earlier. Woven through the grass, leaves with a sharp, heavy scent, close to the smell of camphor, the white cream your grandmother once rubbed on her chest when she had a cold. Our ancestors didn't know why it worked. They just knew one thing: sleeping on these leaves meant fewer bites, fewer rashes, fewer skin infections. That knowledge was passed down the same way all knowledge was passed down then, by watching what happened when you used it, and what happened when you didn't. Then ash. Spread evenly across the surface before lying down, not for warmth, not for ritual. Ash is alkaline, high pH, which means it kills fungi, bacteria, and most soft-bodied insects on contact. It is also completely dry and fine-grained, which means it fills the microscopic spaces in the surface where mites and parasites would otherwise nest. Modern pest control uses the same mechanism in the form of diatomaceous earth, a powder sold in garden centers that kills insects by the same physical and chemical principle. Theirs cost nothing, needed no factory, and replenished itself every time the fire burned. A different cave, a more recent layer, adds one more piece. In 2011, the same Wadley led an excavation at Sibudu Cave, also in South Africa, in bedding dated to roughly 77,000 years, far younger than Border Cave, but the same idea, refined further. Pressed into that layer, leaves of Cryptocarya woodii, a tree whose crushed scent repels insects on contact, the same logic citronella candles use today, just considerably older. Two different caves, two different moments, separated by well over 100,000 years, the same problem, solved twice, independently. 3 layers, 3 separate problems, each one solved by a different material, each material chosen through generations of observation about what worked and what didn't. The bottom layer, structural support, the same job as springs. The middle layer, chemical insect deterrence, the same job as pest control. The top layer, alkaline surface barrier, the same job as antimicrobial treatment. A mattress, a pesticide, a disinfectant, all 3, made from grass and ash. In a cave, 200,000 years before anyone thought to sell these things separately, and the system maintained itself. The grass pulled a meaningful amount of moisture out of the body every night. Left in the morning sun, it dried completely, moisture gone, structure restored, ready for the next night. When parasites accumulated beyond what the ash could handle, the entire layer was burned. The ash left behind became the base for the next layer. The fire that cooked the food also cleaned the bed. Nothing was discarded, nothing was wasted. A self-sustaining hygiene cycle requiring no technology except observation and flame, running continuously for 200,000 years before anyone invented the concept of changing your sheets. On colder nights, animal skins did additional work on top of whatever the ground already offered, and the arrangement was just as deliberate. The bottom skin laid fur side down into the ground, the hollow hairs pulling moisture away from the surface and creating distance from the cold earth beneath. The top skin pulled over fur side up, trapping warm air from the body in millions of tiny hollow shafts. Two skins, fur pointing in opposite directions. One layer to move moisture out, one layer to keep warmth in. The same principle inside every high-end sleeping bag sold today, without the synthetic fill. Where vegetation was scarce, Arctic hunter-gatherer groups still found a way to use what little grew. A thin layer of willow branches went down first, across a shallow pit dug into the snow for shelter from the wind, a buffer between body heat and the snow underneath. Caribou fur went on top of that. The same idea as the grass and ash at Border Cave, just adapted to a landscape with almost nothing growing in it at all. The materials were whatever the earth provided. 200,000 years of refined sleeping practice, before anyone invented the concept of a mattress. So let's go back, a specific night. 200,000 years ago. The sleeping spot was chosen before the light went. Not randomly, this was the first decision of the night, and it was made with the same seriousness as the decision about where to hunt or where to cross a river. Get it wrong and the night cost more than it needed to. The ground had to be slightly elevated. Not dramatically, a few handspans higher than the surrounding surface was enough. Cold air is heavy, it flows downhill and pools in low ground the way water does. Anyone who has ever camped and woken at 3 a.m. freezing while the people on slightly higher ground slept fine already understands this. Our ancestors understood it not as physics but as felt experience, repeated across hundreds of nights until it became knowledge so obvious it no longer needed explaining. The orientation mattered too. Back to the prevailing wind, so the body blocked the wind rather than receiving it full on the face. Close enough to the fire that the radiant warmth reached the sleeping surface. Far enough that smoke rose above rather than across it. These were not approximations, they were calibrations. Adjusted each night based on where the wind was coming from, how strong the fire was burning, how many people were sleeping in the group that night. Then the ground itself was prepared. Stones and debris cleared with hands and feet, not for comfort, but because a single sharp stone under the hip wakes you straight up. Then comes the repositioning, the lost warmth, another 20 minutes spent trying to fall back under. So the ground was cleared. Every night. The surface reading happened next. Is the ground here too soft, the kind that holds dampness instead of letting it pass through? Avoid it. Is there a hollow that will cup the hip in the wrong direction? Avoid that too. Has this spot been used before? Is the earth compacted and level rather than uneven? Prefer it. These were not conscious checklists, they were the automatic assessments of people who had been doing this since childhood, who had learned from people who had been doing it since their childhood, in an unbroken chain of accumulated knowledge about how to read ground that stretches back further than we can trace. Then the grass went down, the technique already described, coarse below, soft above, compressed to the right depth. But the compression itself took knowledge. Too loose and the surface failed at the shoulder by midnight. Too dense and it lost the give that protected the hip. The right depth came from experience. From doing it wrong and remembering what wrong felt like in the body at 2 a.m. Then came the skins. But here is what most people miss about the skins. It was not just about warmth. A body loses heat to the ground far faster than it loses heat to the air. Lying directly on cold earth without insulation can pull enough heat out of the body to interrupt sleep within a couple of hours. Even on a night that isn't especially cold. The skin on the ground was not decoration. It was the barrier that made continuous sleep physically possible. The bottom skin, fur down. The top skin, fur up. In between, a sleeping person whose core temperature stayed regulated not by a thermostat but by two pieces of dead animal arranged in exactly the right configuration. Skin, body, skin, insulation above and below, with no need to think about which side was supposed to do what. A dozen or so people settle within arm's reach. Not for sentiment. Because the group was not just warmth and safety, it was information. Someone sleeping lightly at the edge of the group who stirred at an unfamiliar sound was a signal that reached every other sleeper without waking them fully. The nervous system of a sleeping group was distributed across the whole circle. No single person had to stay fully awake to keep the group safe. The group itself was the alarm system. The children and the elderly at the center, closest to the fire. The strongest adults at the perimeter. Not assigned, not discussed, the arrangement that had worked the night before and the night before that, repeated until it no longer felt like a choice. Someone shifts position without being asked, giving up the spot where the grass sits thickest to the person lying beside them. Not because the cold demanded it, just because. The kind of thing that costs nothing to give and means everything to receive. And then the body curled, knees up, arms in, spine curved, not because the surface was uncomfortable, the surface was as good as it was going to get, but because a curled body exposes less surface area to the air above the skin layer. The thermal cocoon formed by the fur above and the curled posture together kept the core temperature stable through the night without the body having to burn additional reserves to compensate for heat loss. Modern humans lying flat and straight on a climate-controlled mattress do not need to curl. The thermostat does the work the posture used to do. But when the power goes out in winter and the heating fails, notice what the body does. Without being told, without deciding. It curls. Sleep came within minutes, not because the surface was luxurious, because every variable that the nervous system checks before allowing deep sleep had been addressed. Elevation correct, wind blocked, fire at the right distance, group close, moisture barrier in place, temperature stable, posture conserving heat. The body's checklist was complete, so it went under. But here's the part most people never think about. The surface itself was doing something nobody expected. The sleep itself was nothing like what we think of as normal. Here's the part that flips the assumption people carry about which surface actually stayed cleaner. Researchers at Ohio State University found that a typical used mattress can hold anywhere from 100,000 to 10 million dust mites, feeding on flakes of shed skin and trapped sweat that build up, layer after layer, for years. Nobody has ever run that same test on a bed of grass and ash from 200,000 years ago, but a surface that gets torn down and rebuilt every few nights never gets the chance to build up much of anything. A surface that sits untouched for a decade does. The grass got replaced. The ash got renewed. The whole surface got rebuilt from scratch the moment it started working against the people sleeping on it, not by magic, but because someone did it, night after night, the same way they fed the fire without being told to. Nobody understood bacteria. Nobody understood mites. They didn't need to. The ash and the camphor bush leaves were already doing, blindly, exactly what modern anti-mite and antimicrobial treatments try to do now. Except this version cost nothing, and got rebuilt fresh every few nights instead of sprayed on once a year. A modern mattress can be aired out in the sun, vacuumed, flipped, treated. None of that is a secret. Almost nobody does any of it on a real schedule. It just sits there, year after year, quietly accumulating, the opposite of what was happening in that cave 200,000 years ago. This is not a flaw in the design. The foam is better, the springs are better, the comfort, by almost any measure, is better. But the one habit that mattered most back in that cave, tear it down before it turns against you, got left behind somewhere along the way. Nobody is burning anything anymore. The surface the modern world spent a century trying to improve, they never left it behind. They just kept rebuilding it, season after season, instead of letting it sit. The surface wasn't the problem. The surface was the solution. Our ancestors spent 3 minutes choosing where to lie down. Wind direction, ground moisture, distance from the fire, elevation above the surrounding soil. 3 minutes of reading the environment, then done. You spent 3 weeks reading reviews, firmness ratings, pressure mapping, edge support, motion isolation, trial periods, return policies. Then you lay down, adjusted the pillow once, and never thought about it again. They thought about it every single night. That was the point. The thinking was the technology. They replaced the surface beneath them every few days. You replace yours every 8 to 10 years, and pay someone else to clean what accumulates in between. Go back to your mattress. The spring layer is doing what the coarse grass did, holding the body off the ground, distributing weight so no single point takes everything. The foam layer is doing what the soft grass did, compressing at the shoulder and hip so the bones don't have to. The fitted sheet is doing what the top skin did, a surface layer that absorbs moisture and gets stripped away while the layers beneath stay clean. The ergonomic pillow is doing what a folded skin or a raised patch of ground did, keeping the cervical spine from dropping out of alignment through the night. The solution stayed the same, only the materials changed. For 200,000 years, they tested it, broke it, and rebuilt it from grass and ash, and most nights, that was enough to let a body finally stop fighting and go under. It worked.